Hello guys, and welcome to this very special spoilercast for The Last of Us Season 2. As I said, it is going to be a spoilercast. I will be spoiling what has happened in The Last of Us Seasons 1 and 2, but just to be clear, I will not be spoiling anything to do with later seasons to do with the rest of The Last of Us Part 2. As I'm sure you're aware, the second game has been split into multiple seasons. If you've watched the show, you know what I mean. It is breaking up that story, so I'm not going to talk about stuff that's going to happen after Season 2, most likely. So, if you've watched the show but haven't played the game, this is a safe spoiler zone for you. Ultimately, I will make some comparisons to the game, but I'm not going to make too many of those because it's just a little bit reductive and frustrating for people who haven't seen the game. This isn't a review of the game per se, it's a review of the show, and sort of like the people who've read the book, I think the people who've played the game can actually be a little bit more insufferable. So I'll be conscious of that. Thank you to everyone who sent in all of your reviews on social media when I did a call out. You guys sent in so many, but we're reading out a handful with sort of varying reviews there, definitely, from how people are receiving it. As you'll notice, it's just me today. George is not here. George has not seen the rest of Season 2 of The Last of Us. We've both watched Episode 1 together at a launch event, which we enjoyed very much. And then I think George, for all sorts of reasons, didn't have time to get around to it. I basically binged it all in a day when I was delayed for a flight, and I knew I was so excited to talk to people about it. But it's really hard to align both of us to have seen a show at the same time to be ready to review it in a timely way that's relevant for you guys. So as it stands, it's just me. It's the kind of thing that we really do let ourselves down a little bit, unfortunately, when it comes to reviewing and covering TV shows, just because there's so many hours of content to watch. And me and George, I think the best way to talk about television actually is when you get to talk about spoilers from people who've seen it. If we can't do that, we're almost like saying the episode's good, go and watch it, or it's not so good, which I just don't think serves the audience. So I think we might find ourselves doing these spoiler casts with one of us, depending on who's seen what at what time. But for now, today, it's just me. I'm actually recording with George later. I think he will get to the show. He actually had Joel's death spoiled for him, which is a huge shame. When we went to that event, and we went to go see Episode 1, Joel dies in Episode 2. And I remember George hadn't played the game. And we watched that first episode where it teases the arrival of Abby, and the credits rolled, and we weren't getting a second episode. And I said to George, I was like, I think you should be careful when you're here in this crowd of like nerds and content creators and enthusiasts, because people are going to be talking about what's coming. I didn't spoil it for him, but I was like, you might just want to get out of here or like be careful. And of course, immediately after we got out into the lobby, someone talked about Joel dying, and that just killed George's enthusiasm for the series. I did reiterate to him that it's not what happens at the end of the series, like it's part of the entire arc of the show. It's not what defines the series, it's like a part of it. But anyway, I think he was a little bit sour from it, which is totally fair. But for anyone who's listened to Pulp Kitchen for a long time, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of The Last of Us. I'm just a mega fan of it. I really do remember when Part 1 came out. It was just called The Last of Us back then. I was just blown away, not only by the incredible storytelling, but how conflicted it made me feel. It was the first time I really spoke to people about a video game, and it wasn't just, yeah, man, that was awesome. It was, how did that make you feel? And did you agree with that character? And it was complex and nuanced. And I really got into really interesting conversations with people, like you would about a really challenging piece of cinema, about our thoughts around it. And I think what Naughty Dog's really clever at doing, the developers of the original game, is playing on this idea that you, in a video game, inherently control and play as a person, and there's an assumption that you are on board with all of their actions and everything that they do. And in that very last moment, you're forced to make a decision. You don't necessarily agree with it, but you have to carry it out anyway. And I think that is what makes the genius of the gameplay of that so compelling, is that you don't always agree with what you're doing on screen, but you have to do it nonetheless, as the very nature of playing a game. And the thing about Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 is that they are such different games. Yes, they have the returning characters. Yes, they exist in the same world. But the sentiment and the message of those two stories are so diametrically opposed to each other that I think that's where a lot of the controversies between people who like Part 1 and like Part 2, or like Season 1 and like Season 2, really exists. And Part 2 was very controversial and divisive when it came out. It was never going to be more of the same. Part 1 is so much about what you're willing to do in the face of such darkness for those you love. And I think Part 2 is definitely about what would you do when fueled by hate, and what are the consequences of that, and how far would you go to right a wrong, and basically like where does that take you as a person. Just a quick recap on the plot of The Last of Us Season 1 sort of, and into Season 2. So The Last of Us finishes with Joel realizing that although Ellie is the cure, and although the Fireflies would be able to make a cure from Ellie, it would mean that Ellie would die and Joel would lose his proxy daughter. And he basically had the choice to save the entire human race or save and protect the girl that he loves after he lost his daughter. And he was using the same words like baby girl to call Ellie that he called his daughter Sarah that he lost. And he decided to instead shoot up a bunch of people in the hospital, kill the doctor that was the only person who could conceivably make a cure and save the world. And he lied. Ellie asked him straight up, swear to me that everything you said about the Fireflies in the hospital was true. And Joel looked her right in the eyes and said, I swear. And then we rolled credits on part 1 and season 1 of the show. Season 2 picks up with Ellie and Joel 5 years later. Ellie is now about 19 years old, and they are living in Jackson, Wyoming, which is this fairly normal, large compound with a large fence to keep the infected away, where they live largely normal lives, very reminiscent of the world they would have had before. It's a full-on community with shops and high streets, and you know, there's a butcher and a baker and a candlestick maker, and there's a barn dance, and people are quite productive, and they have sort of water systems, and they live with, despite, you know, having a lot of security concerns, a relative degree of freedom. They, of course, go out on patrols, and they're waiting to check and manage the infected that come around them. And there is this growing sense that Ellie is mistrusting of Joel, and she does not believe the lie that was said to her. She's very keen to develop her role in the community and go out on patrols. And sort of her and Joel, as a sort of teenager and father-daughter combo, do sort of have a few gripes. Ellie's developing a relationship with a girl called Dina, who they have a very flirty exchange with and have a kiss in a barnyard dance in front of the community, which causes a bit of a controversy. She then lashes out at Joel for trying to protect her, only for the following day for their camp to be raided by some infected, and also a group of people from the Western Liberation Front, or the WLF, or the Wolves. And this is led by a character called Abby, someone called Owen, someone called Nora, and a couple of other characters. And they have been pursuing Joel, and it's revealed that Abby, who is leading this group of people to go and find Joel, is the daughter of the doctor that Joel killed. He was the doctor that you have to kill to get Ellie, and that was Abby's father, and she never forgot and vowed that she would take revenge and kill Joel, and that's exactly what she does. Ellie gets to see them in the nick of time, only to see Joel butchered and bloodied, and Abby makes Ellie watch her kill Joel in front of her eyes in a brutally violent, really sort of like vociferous exchange between characters. It's shocking and it's devastating, and this leads Ellie on a path of vengeance. She calls out to the community, says, I want to go and take these people down. They're resistant to it. Dina comes with her, and along the way they encounter new factions in Seattle. The WLF I already mentioned. They're like a ex-militarized faction of people led by Jeffrey Wright's Isaac, who's a kind of mysterious figure at this point in the story. They are sort of, very sort of like modern, militarized group of people who are at war with another faction called the Seraphites, or the Scars, who have a sort of scar on their face. They are a maniacal, fundamentalist religious group who have almost regressed away from using any technology, worship a deity. They speak in, deeply religious, ways, and they are sort of diametrically opposed to the WLF. And in the game, these are sort of two different enemy types you encounter, and they are both sort of at war with you and you with them. And they play very differently, and they just both have very different interests. And follow Ellie as she descends further down in this dark cycle of vengeance and rage, calling to kill all of the people that were in the room and who helped to kill Joel. This game takes place over the course, once after the death of Joel, in 3 days, and they are labeled as such: Seattle Day 1, Seattle Day 2, Seattle Day 3. And we'll get on to sort of the end when we cut back and what that implies for the show. So there's definitely out the gate, and I really did feel this when I was playing the game, this is definitely an allegory towards warfare, warring factions, people who've been fighting for generations, and the reckoning that causes on people and the damage and destruction it causes for generation after generation. I definitely do think you can look at Last of Us Part 2 as an allegory for a war like that happens in Gaza and the Middle East. I listened to an interview with Neil Druckmann, who wrote, directed, and co-wrote the series. Well, while he never sort of overtly admitted that it's about a specific war or conflict, and I think he's right to not sort of label it overtly, you can definitely see that, you know, this is an allegory for the war that's going through the Middle East, and we hurt you because you hurt us, and you hurt us because we hurt you, and the different generation is inheriting a different version of that violence and that trauma, and it's ultimately a damning indictment on the destruction of war and vengeance and revenge and what it does to generations, and how that violence seeps through to people and what the consequences are. And I think, you know, unfortunately, it's a very timely conversation to have in art and media. But I definitely think that's really powerful. So let's start talking about some things related to the plot. I think there are two types of people that watch this show. Those who knew about Joel dying in the first few hours of the show, and those who didn't. And it was quite funny and cathartic to see this new generation of Last of Us fans discover that moment for themselves. Because when we had to play the game, that happens in like the first 2-3 hours of the game. The game takes about like 20 hours to complete, and it was really shocking. I thought maybe Joel might die, but towards the end, in like a third act thing when characters typically die, but Joel dies in the opening. And although he has many moments throughout the game in the form of flashbacks, it is shocking and harrowing and violent. And it was one of those cases where I remember playing the game. If you don't know, like when a game comes out, it will come out at 1 second past midnight on the day. So I obviously stayed up till midnight, played the game, played like that opening 2.5 hours, got to Joel's death, was completely blindsided and just like shocked and dismayed. And I was so angry at this person, Abby, I didn't know who they was yet. And I was just like, oh my God, but it was also really late and I had work the next day. And I think I had to be like, I need to go to bed, but I had to stop and not play the next bit. I was like, I'm so just blindsided by this decision, and I can understand it yet. And I had to wake up like, you know, sort of the following days and come back to play it and sort of realize. But it is harrowing. It is incredibly traumatizing. And there's also so much that's been unsaid by Ellie and Joel. And I think that moment for me in the show was still brilliant. And even as someone who knew that moment was coming, it was still shocking to me. And I still felt that same rage with Ellie. And just that moment when she does make it and she sees Joel sort of at the very last strand of life, and she's beaten and butchered to the ground, her face is against the concrete, and she's like, please stop, please don't do this, please don't do this. And when Abby does like make her watch, and Ellie's just screaming, being like, I'm gonna fucking kill you, I'm gonna kill all of you. It really does just get you, and you feel so many mixed emotions of like, who is this person? Why have they done this? And it sort of like sets the tone for this completely different story. And as I said before, like Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 are such different stories. Yes, they have the same characters. Yes, they exist in the same world, and the infected are essentially the same. But the message that the game is trying to tell is so completely different. It's not a reiteration of what would you do for those you love. It's what would you do for those you hate. So that moment really did work for me. I also want to give a shout out to episode 1, which I thought was really great, and episode 2, that whole action sequence with the Horde and the break-in. It was such a fun, action-packed, big budget Last of Us, like all the infected reaping through. I thought all the bloaters were just really scary. The infected are fast, and I really just feel like sort of this great sense of threat for this community that have managed to sort of maintain such a great sense of normal life in Jackson. And I just thought it was all really well executed. And so episode 2 of season 2 was such a brilliant moment ending with Joel's death. And I just thought, oh, this is just really firing on all cylinders. And there are some details that I just really loved. Like, I love the details of Ellie's backpack, which is straight from the game. I love the recreation of the barn dance scene with the music. That was almost lifted, you know, shot for shot, line for line from the game. And it was just beautiful. And the way in which you're swept up in Ellie's emotions. We all sort of are falling in love with Dina at the same time that Ellie is. And the dynamic between her and Jesse. I just thought it was really good. And the best episodes of the show for me, I think, are episodes 1, 2, and 6. The rest of the show I'll get onto, where I feel like we're slightly lacking when it comes to Ellie's story. I really liked the fact that we got new versions of Infected, and I think someone mentioned this in the comment, but the Infected are a bit smarter, and there's this new version of the Infected called the Stalkers, and the Stalkers are so horrifying because they Most of the infected you find are kind of like they're in their own thing. They don't really attack you. You sort of attack them, whereas the stalkers actively hunt you and they sneak up on you and grab you. And I think that first interaction with the stalker in episode 1 was great. And later, when you see them, they're just sort of horrifying and really irritating. And I quite liked the inclusion of a new enemy type for them to face. I think that was fun. Jeffrey Wright's Isaac is a character that I liked seeing a bit more of. And I think one of my criticisms of this series is like I wanted to see more of him. And when I knew that Jeffrey Wright was going to return to play his character, because he plays his character in the game, I was thinking, God, I really needed more Isaac compared to the game. That was one of my criticisms of part 2, is that like Isaac is only hinted at in a couple of scenes. I really feel like his character and his motivations weren't fleshed out enough. And I'm hoping in this season he would be fleshed out a bit more, which he wasn't. And I hope maybe in the seasons following we get more Isaac, because he's a really interesting character. He's the leader of the Western Liberation Front. And Jeffrey Wright just kills it. He's so like sinister and softly spoken, and he can be really like threatening without raising his voice. And I think that's always a really good quality for a villain. So yes, we got a little bit more, could have done with even more Isaac, and I look forward to seeing him more. And you know, the series goes on and shows you that Ellie and Dina are traveling through Seattle. And as we travel with Ellie through the series, you really do see her descend into vengeance and the problem that causes. And us as audience members start to question our motives and whether or not we're aligned with Ellie. You see all these things like signs to stop all of this red colouring, especially in the scene when she kills Nora and the horrible act of violence she commits against her, the pathetic fallacy of the heavy rain and the storm as she approaches the aquarium. All of these signs typically in storytelling and literature that tell you like, you should stop, this is bad, danger is coming, what you are doing is not right. And I think that is partly done quite well, but also my main criticism with the show is that we really do lose attachment to Ellie's motivations in this show. And I think as a series, having only 7 episodes to do Ellie's perspective, I think we're really underserved, which I think is a shame. I did start to not be on board with Ellie too soon in the story. I think we should have been a little bit more aligned with Ellie's quest to pursue and hunt down this group of people, at least at this stage. And I just feel like with the flashback episode and only a handful of episodes covered what happened in Seattle, when it got to the 7th episode and I realized it was the last one, I was kind of like, I really feel like we've skimmed the surface on a couple of details here. And I just think we were robbed slightly at an extended look at Ellie's time in Seattle. An example of that is there's a moment at the end of Seattle Day 2 when Ellie and Dina is lifting up Ellie's shirt and she's wiping the cuts and the scars and the bruises off of her back. And it should be a sort of more like caring and intimate moment. But I think Dina's realizing like the damage and the wreckage that she's causing on her body. And she carries the weight of this grief on her. And that's manifesting in in multiple acts of violence. That moment in the game is really quite telling, because it's the first time the game is telling you what you're doing is wrong. And I just don't feel like that moment impacted for the show. And I think for people who maybe haven't played the game and who are watching the show, there's a little bit of dissonance between what we're watching, who we're meant to be rooting for, and the actions of the protagonist. And I really did feel that, and I thought, I don't think the show is quite on board with Ellie here. And ultimately, you're not meant to be, but there's something about the way the perspective is going to shift that I think will make that clear later. And that just isn't working here. And I think part 2 was incredibly divisive when it came out, because you do play as Joel's killer, and Ellie makes decisions that people don't agree with. And we sort of, in the first game, protected this little girl and cared for her. And to see her become a monster, that was very divisive. But we had so much more time in the game and so many more moments to understand and play along to be part of her motivations. I don't think this show serves the character of Ellie enough. And I think when you're looking at Bella Ramsey's portrayal, who I think is very, very good in this, I don't have problems with Bella's performance in the way that I think I've seen some online. I more just think she's actually a little bit underserved by a rushed season. I do think 7 episodes for season 2 isn't enough. I think we should have done, 8 or maybe 9 just to flesh that out. So while I think Bella carries the emotional weight of it, what she's got to work with, some of the switches to violence just feel too sudden. And I think that's clear in the way people are talking about the game, which is a bit of a shame. But one episode that I thought was masterful, which I absolutely adored, was episode 6. And I'm sure it's a lot of people's favorites, which was the flashback to Joel and Ellie's relationship, what had happened between them, the lie that was told, and just culminating in that scene when they're at the porch and, Ellie says, I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'm going to try. And Joel says to her, listen, I would have done it over and over again. It's that doubling down of like, it's like this ultimate gesture of love, being like, I know what I did was wrong, but for you, I would have done it a million times over. And just, it completely broke my heart. And I knew that scene, and I knew that moment, and that's actually a moment you don't get until the very end of part 2, which sort of cuts through the emotional core of why Ellie's done what she's done. I really just feel like that was the money scene, and that whole episode just really hit home. And then coming back for the finale, I just felt like we were only halfway through Ellie's story, and you had such a great emotional impact there. And to go back to Ellie's story, where I just felt like it was just skimming the surface. And like in the last episode, for example, all the stuff to do with her getting on the boat and encountering the Seraphite Island, and then eventually making it to the aquarium, it was just so rushed, and her jumping in the storm, I just kind of felt like we've really skimmed through Seattle here. And by the time Ellie goes and does what she does by killing Owen and Mel and the reveal that she's pregnant, just never really hit. And so I'm a little bit, again, feeling very underserved by season 2. And it's just like seeing a character who we're meant to be rooting for make poor choices, and that those poor choices are becoming more evident by the sort of compressed storyline here, I think is a massive shame. But moving on to where the show ends, which is we're picking up in the last 2 minutes of season 2 with Abby waking up and the reveal of her in the stadium with the WLF, and seeing Seattle day 1, revealing that we are going to cut back over the last 3 days and see the story from Abby's perspective. I love that tease, and even though I know that's what's probably going to be sort of the basis for season 3, I enjoyed that reveal of people seeing there's going to be a perspective twist. I'm sure people who are watching hated Abby in that moment, and you go, I can't believe you killed our Pedro Pascal, our Joel. And it's sort of this moment where you go, I don't want to understand who this person is. I hate her. How could she do what she's done? I think that's going to be a really fun tease, and I like that that's a moment that's going to be teased for people. But I think it's quite long to have made people wait now what must be at most 2 years for season 3 of the show. When you play that perspective shift, you're playing it over the course of 3-4 gaming sessions. Maybe you do it in like 20 hours, and that perspective shift is less jarring because it's not, you're not waiting years apart to understand the motivations of that character. So I'm a little bit, for people watching the show, feeling like you're not going to have as positive a reaction doing this perspective shift over the course of so many years. I think because it's going to take so long, that might slightly irritate and dilute people's interest in this show. Again, I don't know what they're going to do for season 3. I feel like they could do so many other different things and spread around the story and unpack loads of other parts. But looking at the way they did season 2, I'm concerned that season 3 will also be like 6-7 episodes and will sort of rush through Abby's section here. So look, there are so many great ingredients in season 2 that I just think have worked really well. But as a show, it's underserving the story, which I think is a massive, massive shame. Structurally, part 1 and part 2 are so different, and I always knew that in order to make season 2 of the show a success, they would have to sort of break it up and truncate it like this. But I think the sentiment coming out from people is like, it did feel a bit rushed. Some of the character moments did feel a little bit underserved. And I think that's being revealed in people's impression of the characters. For example, like the motivations of Abby aren't revealed this early. And I feel like seeing that her dad was the guy in the hospital maybe should have been withheld, and instead you double down on Ellie. That's at least my thoughts. So those are my main things. Like ultimately, it's a show that has so many great individual moments, and season 6 might be my favorite episode of television. Sorry, episode 6 of season 2 might be my favorite episode of television so far this year. But as a season, it's just a bit of a shame. I did still really enjoy it. It did work for me, and I was emotionally impacted. And there were moments where the action was great. I'm actually just a little bit gutted we're not going to get more of Ellie's story fleshed out, because I think what the game does with it is so smart. So it's just a little bit lacking here, which is a massive shame. I asked you guys to send in your thoughts, and you did very kindly on Instagram, or you can email them in to hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com. Jordan writes in, friend Jordan, hope you're well, Jordan. John writes in and says, thought this series was on a bit of a downhill trajectory until Ep 6, when we saw Joel and Ellie finally talk through the big lie. As a massive fan of the game, it was the first time the TV show made me more emotional than when I played the game. The performances from both of them stood on that porch as they confronted each other were sensational. I shed a few tears throughout playing the game, but bawled like a flipping baby when I watched that part of the series. Got me excited again and very much looking forward to future episodes. I agree, like that was just an amazing moment. It was the best episode. It might be one of the best episodes of the entire series. Cohen writes up and says, I guess I can sum up my feelings about season 2 in one word, and that's rushed. It sprinted through the first part of The Last of Us 2's story. I think they should have padded it out with an extra episode or two, especially before killing off Joel, or for the TV audience. Yes, this is a good point. I thought maybe, given the reaction to Joel is so, vociferous and people react really badly to it, and Pedro's obviously a great asset to have on your show, I thought they maybe could have given him another episode or two and held on to that relationship and explored more with his character while he was alive, and then you extend the back end. But no, they did just kill him. So again, it's underserving stuff slightly. Cohen goes on to say, it lacks that emotional impact, and the reason for that, I think, is because the show hadn't earned it. In the games, you spent way more hours adventuring with Ellie and Joel to build that relationship, which brings me to my next point. There wasn't enough of them skulking around and having to fight infected off. It was sorely lacking in this department because they were rushing to lay the groundwork for Jackson, Abby's team, the death of Joel, the Wolves, and the Seraphites. That there was just no time for anything else. Ellie killing Nora, Mel, and Owen had no weight. Sorry, but Ramsey's performance in season 2 was terrible. She was great as young Ellie, but she just couldn't portray the emotional turmoil of an older, bitter Ellie. So just on your point about there was no time for anything else, not having enough action scenes, it's like that second episode action scene was where they put all their action budget, and it was brilliant, but I could have done with more Last of Us combat. Like, show us like what was great about the game, and going through Seattle and fighting off different factions. Again, I agree, there should have been more action. I don't buy that Bella Ramsey's performance was bad. I understand where people have problems with it. I think the difference is that Ashley Johnson, who plays her role in the game, it was always an adult when she played it, and she played a 14-year-old. Bella Ramsey, I think, was 17 or something when she was playing a 14-year-old in the show, and now is playing someone closer to her age. I think Bella Ramsey is playing someone who is more 19 than Ashley Johnson's version in the game. I always felt like Ashley Johnson, I think she's incredible, by the way. I'm totally in awe of her performance. When I think about her early performance, Ashley Johnson's performance feels like someone who's 29 versus 19. Yes, Ellie's going through quite a lot in a world where everything is lost and probably has to be more grown up than the average 19-year-old. But what Bella's doing, I think, is capturing that slightly immature, slightly irritating, emotional side to a 19-year-old that I also think is very valuable. I don't think Bella Ramsey is the problem here. I think it's the motivations in the script not serving Bella's performance. So I do slightly disagree with you there, but yeah, on all the things being rushed, I'm totally there with you. Jonathan writes in, where is the second half of the second season? For such a groundbreaking season 1, this was half-baked retreading on old stays and fundamentally falling so far short can only be seen as a disappointment. Georgina writes in and says, so happy they are separating the Abby POV and Ellie. Some very dragging episodes that took us nowhere. The flashback was much needed, that's episode 6, as I think the absence of Joel is massively felt in this season, however, lacked the emotion from episode 3 from season 1. The action, stalkers, etc. Too few and too fast. I doubt Ellie's ability to effectively take out Abby's team, and also at this stage, as she looks permanently surprised by the presence, is anything considered, she wandered cross-country with Joel and faced a shit ton of these things. I need more darkness from Ellie. The odd glimpses we have had of rage or emotion from her were some great acting moments, e.g. the PTSD scream in the hospital and the confrontation with Nora, but not enough of this considering this is a mission of pure revenge. The shooting of Mel by accident, I think the actress was genuinely heartbreaking in that scene and actually much more effective in the game. I could go on for days. Erin writes in and says, 7 episodes? It felt so incomplete. No one explains why the infected are smart now and why do they attack Jackson, but never again when the city is so vulnerable when rebuilding. Who are the scars? Who is their prophet? So little context in these new storylines and characters you're expected to go along with out of self-indulgence. But I love Bella Ramsey. Sad Pestro got Ned Starked, but it was necessary. Dina is also a cool character. Yes, it really is a Ned Stark moment. Yeah, I know what you mean. 7 episodes, what the hell? With the fact of being smart, it's kind of like, it's a new enemy type, but yeah, it's just a bit underserved there. And the thing about the scars, like the introduction of the Seraphites is really well done in the game, and it's really scary when they are whistling to communicate. And usually, like, if you encounter a faction, you can hear them going, oh my god, they got one of us, go check over there. Where is she? She's not over here. You can hear them communicating and you understand it. The Seraphites whistle to each other, and it's really scary, and they're better at hiding. And I thought the interaction with the Seraphites is really good. Again, the Prophet, very underserved. I'm sure that's coming in season 3. Could have done with more there. Again, we could have had a longer series. I kind of feel like are 7 episode seasons ever really that good? Can you name me a really good, like, short half season? I kind of feel like when that happens, there's always something that feels missing there. Just a theory. I might be wrong. I kind of feel like it's a thing there. Ed writes in, says, pretty good adaptation for viewers that haven't played the game. My main gripe is that Ellie doesn't seem to take what she's doing seriously. In the game, she's much more aware how dangerous this mission is. Ellie in the show is too childlike and goofy at times. Looking forward to season 3, as Abby's perspective was my favourite from the game. Love the pod. Keep up the great work. Joe writes in and says, hi boys, I emailed in before but didn't know you were doing a spoilercast on the show. As a really big fan of the second game, I actually really enjoyed this season of the show more so than the first season. This season tackled the story in a way I thought was fitting and adapted things to better serve the show's narrative structure as opposed to the games. The hate towards Bella Ramsey is completely unnecessary and it's just another example of internet trolls picking on an actor just because they don't like the look of the character. I really liked young Manzino as Jesse, Gabriel Luna as Tommy, but Isabella Marcel's Dina is such a great performance that provided needed levity to the story and make you care about Ellie and Dina's relationship. Episodes 2, 4, and 6 were my favourite. Really strong filmmaking and narrative progression that I thought worked for the show. It'd be really interesting to see how people react to the season's abrupt conclusion, like the game. I really did like the inclusion of Dina. I think she was really good. I like that they made more of a moment of Dina learning that Ellie is immune. And I think in the game, maybe they didn't make enough light of the fact that, like, that is a huge reaction to realise that she's immune. Yeah, and then you do that reveal of, like, I was the cure. There was one point we were going to cure and it didn't happen. And the whole thing where Dina's like, I would kill you. She's literally about to pull the trigger. She totally believes that anyone who gets bitten is going to turn. And she spends that whole night watching Ellie sleep. And I thought that was a really great reveal for those two characters. I actually did like that there. Arthur writes in and says, one of the biggest mistakes in this adaptation is that they made Ellie's character more sympathetic and excusable, whereas in the game she goes down the path of revenge and loses all of her charm and likableness and turns into a shadow of her former self. The show so far isn't successful in showing how the path of revenge helps no one, and that aspect of Ellie being rotted from the core is missing. Yeah, we needed more of that. We needed more of Ellie really sort of turning, and that moment was unfortunately rushed. Evie says, I've played the game, but I don't think this season deserved so much hate. I did think Ellie had turned bratty, like she was almost younger, but I still really enjoyed this. Did find it a little rushed, still very keen for season 3. And just one more here from Simon. Yes, I binge-watched the first and second series in less than a week, thoroughly enjoyed it, and was absolutely shocked by the second episode of Series 2, but it built for a fantastic story by the end of Series 2. I always enjoyed the episode with Bob, and Series 1, it was very well made. Bring on Season 3, I can't wait. So a mixture of positive and negative here. I think just like coming to a close here about what are the issues with it. I think Ellie's motivation in the show is a problem. I also think it might be a problem in the game as well, but underserving Season 2 and only giving it 7 episodes, where half of those episodes aren't really like Ellie's days in Seattle, it's kind of flashbacks and the intro, I think has left that half of the story feeling a bit underserved. And I'm slightly concerned that as we go into season 3 and get Abby's perspective, is that now going to be underserved by having underserved Ellie's? I really hope that for season 3, they have the time and the awareness maybe just to let it breathe. Last of Us Part 3 isn't coming out anytime soon. I think they've confirmed they're going to do 4 seasons, so we've got 2 more in the barrel. Take your time. Isn't the show a hit and a success? Do you not have the budget to do a 9, 10, 11 episode season. I really just want this story to breathe a little bit more, and for them, like they did with episode 3 of season 1, take their time to develop parts of the world that we weren't privy to in the game. I think that's going to be the key to the success of not just trying to compress and dilute the game at the same time in the form of a show, but it should be added to. And I think that's where the concern is here. Did I have a bad time with season 2 of The Last of Us? No. And even for someone who knew all the story beats, I still had a great time revisiting it, and now I want to go and play the game again. And all the emotional bits I knew that were coming, a la in, episode 6, still just really worked for me, and that's a testament to the writing and the actors' performances. So a little bit mixed, not as good as season 1. I just hope they can bring it back slightly with season 3 and serve the story in the way that I know it deserves to be. But that is all we have time for today for this Spoilercast. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. I hope you didn't mind me sort of like aimlessly rambling about my passion for The Last of Us and reading some of your opinions. I'm so sorry. We got so many thoughts and comments on The Last of Us. I didn't have time to read them all, but thank you to everyone who sent them in regardless. Make sure you check out this week's episode. Last week it was The Phoenician Scheme and another film I can't remember. Me and George are recording this week to do a couple of fun episodes. We're seeing How to Train Your Dragon later. Don't forget to check out the Patreon when we're doing Double Take. And also, guys, I have another podcast on my channel where I'm interviewing people who work in media. So if you would like to hear from a podcast that I'm doing, it's called the James Briefel Podcast. I'm speaking to a bunch of people who do stuff in media, which is like all about my other work. I just did one with a food chef, an influencer called Seema Pankania, who's at Seema Gets Baked. I talked to her all about becoming she started as a chef working at Gordon Ramsay's Lucky Cat, and then she went on to go and work at this place called Pulp Kitchen, where she became a food presenter, and now she's doing live television. I just asked her about how you stand out and work in a really crowded space, which is like food content creation. So that was a really interesting podcast you can go and check out on my channel. And also I sat down with musician and singer Zach Abel and talked about how you stand out in the music space. I'm going to do one with a football YouTuber called Thogden. I've got one with my mate Ish, who's just had his pilot approved for the BBC. That's going to come out in a couple of weeks. So if you fancied a little bit more of me, go and check out that podcast. But for the meantime, guys, I would love to come back and do more stuff on The Last of Us as and when it comes out soon. I really want to do one on Andor Season 2. I've heard so many great things. I want to cover that before it gets too late. So thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for more Pulp Kitchen, and I'll see you guys very soon in an episode, hopefully with George, because it's much more fun to talk with someone else. Thank you so much, guys. Take care and see you very soon. Bye-bye.